Hello. Did I ever tell you that I met a real live princess once? I sat next to her at a dinner party at a castle. Oh, she was very lovely, very sweet. And we were talking about how much we love to read. And so I said to her, "Oh, Your Highness, what's your favourite story about a princess?" Well, she closed her eyes for a bit, and then suddenly they popped wide open, and she said, "The Princess and the Pea." And she tossed down her napkin, jumped up, ran out, slammed the door. Obviously, I was very surprised. I looked at the gentleman across the table, who was a duke, and said, "Did I do something to offend the princess? Was there something about the Princess and the Pea that upset her?" And the old duke said, "I'm sorry, my lady, you misunderstood. She said the princess has to pee." True story. Well, and now here it is just for you. The Princess and the Pea by Hans Christian Andersen. There was once a prince, and he wanted a princess, but then she must be a real princess. He travelled right around the world to find one, but there was always something wrong. There were plenty of princesses, but whether they were real princesses, he had great difficulty in discovering. There was always something which was not quite right about them. So at last he'd come home again, and he was very sad because he wanted a real princess so badly. One evening there was a terrible storm. It thundered and lightened, and the rain poured down in torrents. Indeed, it was a fearful night. In the middle of the storm, somebody knocked at the town gate, and the old king himself was sent to open it. It was a princess who stood outside, but she was in a terrible state from the rain and the storm. Well, the water streamed out of her hair and her clothes and ran at the top of her shoes and out at the heel, but she said that she was a real princess. Well, we shall soon see if that is true, thought the old queen, but she said nothing. She went into the bedroom, took all the bedclothes off, and laid a pea on the bedstead. Then she took 20 mattresses and piled them on top of the pea, and then 20 feather beds on top of the mattresses. And this was where the princess was to sleep that night. In the morning, they asked her how she'd slept. "Oh, terribly bad," said the princess. "I hardly closed my eyes the whole night. Heaven knows what was in the bed. I seemed to be lying upon something hard. Oof, my whole body is black and blue this morning. It's terrible." They saw at once that she must be a real princess when she'd felt the pea through the 20 mattresses and the 20 feather beds. I mean, nobody but a real princess could have such a delicate skin. So the prince took her to be his wife, for now he was sure that he had found a real princess, and the pea was put into the museum, where it may still be seen if no one has stolen it. The end. This is a true story. Oh, hello. I first read this story when I was on a trip to Japan when I was 7. My mother was doing a scientific study on the eating habits of the sumo wrestlers. And for 2 weeks, my parents and I lived at a sumo training camp. Sumo wrestling is an ancient and honored sport in Japan, and the wrestlers are encouraged to eat and eat and eat and eat to get as big as possible, but they must also stay
strong and athletic. My parents and I watched them train. We ate with them. We slept with them on mats on the floor. And one day when we went to dinner with the wrestlers, they served a 10-course sushi dinner. Sushi is a raw fish served in many different ways, and it's delicious. When the third course came, the chef warned me that it was blowfish or fugu, and he told me that the fish could be poisonous if it wasn't prepared just right. And if I didn't want to eat it, well, he'd understand. I asked him what would happen if I was poisoned, and he said that after a few hours I'd get dizzy and hot and have trouble breathing and then drop dead. Well, the idea of eating a raw fish that might kill me was scary, but I didn't want anyone else to know about it. So I smiled and I ate the blowfish in 2 big bites. A few hours later, I woke up in the middle of the night. It was pitch black, and I knew that something was wrong. I was hot and sweaty, and my heart was pounding, and I could barely breathe, as if I was being squeezed in a vice. It was the blowfish. Well, I had to do something, so I yelled, "Blowfish poisoning! Help!" Well, someone switched on the light, and everyone just stared at me. It turns out I wasn't dying. I was just squished between 2 gigantic sumo wrestlers who'd rolled into me during the night. I was a sumo wrestler hot dog. I was the dog and they were the buns, 650-pound buns. Well, that was a silly misunderstanding because I was worried about trying something new and different. But this story is about a much more serious misunderstanding, one that could cost a young woman her very life. It's an exciting fairy tale called The 6 Swans by the Brothers Grimm. A king was once hunting in a great forest, and he chased his prey so eagerly that none of his men could follow him. As evening approached, he stopped and looked around and saw that he was lost. He looked for a way out of the woods, but he could not find one. And then he saw an old woman with a bobbing head who approached him. She was a witch. "My dear woman," he said to her, "can you show me the way through the woods?" "Oh, yes, your majesty," she answered. "I can indeed. However, there's one condition, and if you do not fulfill it, you will never get out of these woods, and you will die here of hunger." "I have a daughter," said the old woman, "who's as beautiful as anyone you could find in the world, and who well deserves to become your wife. If you will make her your queen, I will show you the way out of the woods." Well, the king was so frightened that he consented, and the old woman led him to her cottage, where her daughter was sitting by the fire. She received the king as if she had been expecting him. He saw that she was very beautiful, but in spite of this, he did not like her, and he could not look at her without secretly shuddering. After he had lifted the girl onto his horse, the old woman showed him the way, and the king arrived again at his royal castle, where the wedding was celebrated. The king had been married before, and by his first wife he had 7 children, 6 boys and 1 girl. He loved them more than anything else in the world. Fearing that the stepmother might not treat them well, even do them harm, he took them to a secluded castle which stood in the middle of a forest. It was so well hidden and so difficult to find that he himself would not have found it if a wise woman had not given him a ball of magic yarn. Whenever he threw it down in front of him, it would unwind itself and show him the way. However, the king went out to his dear children so often that the queen took notice of his absence. She was curious and wanted to know what he was doing out there all alone in the woods. So she gave a large sum of money to his servants, and they revealed the secret to her. And they also told her about the ball of yarn, which could point out the way all by itself. She did not rest until she discovered where the king kept the ball of yarn, and then she made some little shirts of white silk. Having learned the art of witchcraft from her mother, she sewed a magic charm into each one of them, and then one day when the king had ridden out hunting, she took the little shirts and went into the woods, and the ball of yarn showed her the way. The children, seeing that someone was approaching from afar, thought that their dear father was coming to them, and full of joy they ran to meet him. And then she threw one of the shirts over each of them, and when the shirts touched their bodies, they were transformed into swans, and they flew away over the woods. The queen went home very pleased, believing that she had gotten rid of her stepchildren. However, the girl had not run out with her brothers, and the queen knew nothing about her. The next day, the king went to visit his children, but he found no one there but the girl. "Where are your brothers?" asked the king. "Oh, dear father," she answered, "they've gone away and left me alone." And then she told him that from her window she had seen how her brothers had flown away over the woods as swans, and she showed him the feathers that they had dropped into the courtyard, after which she had gathered up. The king mourned, but he did not think that the queen had done this wicked deed. Fearing that the girl would be stolen away from him as well, he wanted to take her away with him, but she was afraid of her stepmother and begged the king to let her stay just this one more night in the castle in the woods. But the poor girl thought, "I can no longer stay here. I will go and look for my brothers." And when the night came, she ran away and went straight into the woods, and she walked the whole night long without stopping, and the next day as well, until she was too tired to walk any further. Then she saw a hunter's hut and went inside. She found a room with 6 little beds, but she did not dare to get into one of them. Instead, she crawled under one of them and lay down on the hard ground where she intended to spend the night. The sun was about to go down when she heard a rushing sound and saw 6 swans flying through the window. Landing on the floor, they blew on one another and blew all their feathers off, and then their swan skins came off just like shirts. The girl looked at them and recognized her brothers. She was happy and crawled out from beneath the bed, and the brothers were no less happy to see their little sister, but their happiness did not last long. "You cannot stay here," they said to her. "This is a robber's den. If they come home and find you, they will murder you." "Well, can't you protect me?" asked the little sister. "No," they answered. "We can take off our swanskins for only a quarter hour each evening, and only during that time do we have our human forms, and after that we are again transformed into swans." Crying, the little sister said, "Can you not be redeemed?" "Alas, no," they answered. "The conditions are too difficult. You would not be allowed to speak or to laugh for 6 years, and in that time you would have to sew together 6 little shirts from daisies for us, and if a single word were to come from your mouth, all your work would be lost." And after the brothers had said this, the quarter hour was over, and they flew out the window again as swans. Nevertheless, the girl firmly resolved to redeem her brothers, even if it should cost her her life. She left the hunter's hut and went to the middle of the woods and seated herself in a tree, and there spent the night. The next morning, she went out and gathered daisies and began to sew. She could not speak with anyone, and she had no desire to laugh. She sat there, looking only at her work. After she had been already there for a long, long time, it happened that another king was hunting in these woods. His huntsman came to the tree where the girl was sitting. They called to her, saying, "Who are you?" But she did not answer. "Come down to us," they said. "We will not harm you." She only shook her head, and when they pressed her further with questions, she threw her golden necklace down to them, thinking that this would satisfy them. But they did not stop, so she then threw down her belt, and when this didn't help, her garters, and then one thing at a time, and everything that she had on and could do without, until finally she had nothing on but her shift. And the huntsmen, however, not letting themselves be dissuaded, climbed the tree and lifted the girl down and took her to their king. The king asked, "Who are you, and what are you doing in that tree?" But she didn't answer. He asked her in every language that he knew, but she remained as speechless as a fish. Because she was so beautiful, the king's heart was touched, and he fell deeply in love with her, and he put his cloak around her and lifted her onto his horse in front of himself and took her to the castle. And there he had her dressed in rich garments, and she glistened in her beauty like bright daylight, but no one could get a word from her. At the table, he seated her by his side, and her modest manners and courtesy pleased him so much that he said, "My desire is to marry her and no one else in the world." And a few days later, they were married. Now the king had a wicked mother who was dissatisfied with his marriage and spoke ill of the young queen. "Who knows," she said, "where the girl who cannot speak comes from? She's not worthy of a king." Well, a year later, after the queen had brought her first child into the world, the old woman took it away from her while she was asleep and smeared her mouth with blood. And then she went to the king and accused the queen of being a cannibal. Well, the king could not believe this, and he would not allow anyone to harm her. She, however, sat the whole time sewing on the shirts and caring for nothing else. And the next time, she again gave birth to a beautiful boy, and the deceitful mother-in-law did the same thing again. But the king could not bring himself to believe her accusations. He said, "She is too pious and good to do anything like that. If she were not speechless, and if she could defend herself, her innocence would come to light." But when the old woman stole away a newly born child for the third time and accused the queen, who did not defend herself with a single word, the king had no choice but to bring her to justice, and she was sentenced to die by fire. When the day came for the sentence to be carried out, it was also the last day of the 6 years during which she had not been permitted to speak or to laugh, and she had thus delivered her dear brothers from the magic curse. The 6 shirts were finished. Only the left sleeve of the last one was missing, and when she was led to the stake, she laid the shirts on her arm. And standing there as the fire was about to be lighted, she looked around, and 6 swans came flying through the air, and seeing that their redemption was near, her heart leapt with joy. The swans rushed towards her, swooping down so that she could throw the shirts over them, and as soon as the shirts touched them, their swan skins fell off, and her brothers stood before her in their own bodies, vigorous and handsome. However, the youngest was missing his left arm. In its place, he had a swan's wing. And they embraced and kissed one another. And then the queen went to the king, who was greatly moved, and she began to speak, saying, "Dearest husband, now I may speak, and reveal to you that I am innocent and falsely accused." Then she told him of the treachery of the old woman who had taken away their 3 children and hidden them. And then, to the king's great joy, they were brought forth. As a punishment, the wicked mother-in-law was tied to the stake and burned to ashes. But the king and the queen, with her 6 brothers, lived many long years in happiness and peace. The end.